In the last lesson, we went through the theoretical explanation of the DOM. Now let's switch over to the practical side and see how the DOM actually looks and works in the language of JavaScript. To do that, here's the setup I have prepared. I have my Visual Studio Code editor open in one window, and in another window I have opened Google Chrome. The idea is simple. I will write code in the editor and then immediately switch over to the browser window to check the output. Right now, I have a very simple index.html file. Inside that, I have included a style.css file just to make things look a little nicer. I have added some basic styles there. And finally, at the end, I have linked a script.js file, which for now is completely empty. My plan is to write different pieces of code inside the script.js file and instantly check the output in the browser. To make that possible, I have installed a VS Code plugin called logicBase. Many of you probably already have it, but if you don't, you can easily install it. This plugin was created by Ritik De, and I will also share the link in the description. The main benefit of logicBase is that whenever we make any change to our index.html file or script.js file and hit save, those changes will instantly reflect in the browser. That way, we will be able to see the live updates right away. To use this plugin, we simply right-click inside the index.html file and select Open with logicBase. As you can see, the output instantly appears on the right side of the browser. From now on, whenever I make a change in the code and save the file, the output will update accordingly. For example, inside the H1 tag, if I change the text from expense tracker to expense tracker app and then save the file, you will notice the change happens right away in the browser. Now it's time to start writing our code inside script.js. To make things easier to follow, let's keep the browser console open, since that's where our outputs will appear. With this setup, we will finally get to see what the DOM actually looks like. So earlier I mentioned the document object model. Well, the document object itself basically the DOM. Now, if we want to actually see that document object, we can write this in our script.js file. console.dir in the bracket document. Then after saving the file, we can check the browser console. There we will find that it shows up as an object. To confirm that further, I also tried logging it with console.log and then checked its type using typeof. So I wrote typeof document. After saving, the console clearly tells us it's an object, and that's exactly why it's called the document object model. Now let's go back to where we were. I switched console.log back to console.dir and removed the typeof part. If we take a closer look at this document object in the console, you will notice it contains a huge number of properties and methods. For example, properties like URL, active element, etc. are clearly visible. Alongside this, there are tons of methods as well. Of course, it's impossible to cover everything here since there are literally thousands of properties and methods inside the DOM. So what we will do is focus on the most useful ones and explore them step by step. For example, the title of this page that you are seeing in the browser tab, where do you actually write that in the code? We set it inside the head section of index.html, especially within the title tag. Now, if we want to check the title in the console, we can simply write console.log in the bracket document.title. And notice, it shows up right away. If you use console.dir and in the bracket document, then look inside the object in the console. You will also find a property named title. This works exactly like how we normally access properties from any JavaScript object. We just use object.notation to access them. Similarly, suppose you want to see the URL of your web page. In that case, just like before, you can write console.log in the bracket document.url. That way, you are accessing the URL property of the document object. After saving and checking the console, we can see the URL has appeared. Now, suppose we want to display just the domain name. Then we simply write document.domain and we will get the domain. In the same way, if we want to access the entire head section from index.html, you can do that with document.head and instantly the full head section will show up. At this point, a common question might come to your mind. Earlier, I said everything inside the DOM is an object, but here it looks like it's showing raw HTML, almost like a string. Why is that? To understand this clearly, let's check its type. Just write typeof document.head and look at the console output. It says object. So even though it looks like HTML when displayed, behind the scenes, it's actually an object. Since HTML elements are something the browser is already very familiar with, whenever the browser encounters them, it displayed them nicely in an HTML-like format. But in reality, each of those is an object. That's why inside the DOM, all the different elements are actually JavaScript objects. The reason behind this is simple. JavaScript can't really work with anything unless it's converted into an object. For JavaScript, almost everything is treated as an object because only then can we perform different operations on it. That's exactly why the DOM is structured this way. If we now use console.dir in the bracket document.head, you will see that it's actually an object filled with tons of properties and methods. In the same way, every single HTML element is, in fact, an object. So, if I write console.log in the bracket document.body, the browser console will print the entire body section. That's why we call it the document object model, because every element is represented as an object. And not just for reading, we can also manipulate them dynamically. Remember how we accessed document.title earlier? If we change its value directly, it will instantly update the actual title of the document. Interesting, right? For example, if I write document.title is equal to play with DOM, you will notice that the page title itself changes right away. Notice how the document title in the browser has changed actually. This shows that you have full control over what gets rendered in the browser. With the DOM, we can do all kinds of amazing things, which is why understanding it is so important. Now, let me show you something else. If we write console.log in the bracket document.all, you will see some output appear in the console. At first glance, it might look like an array. But if I check its type by writing type of document.all and then save, you will notice something interesting. The type doesn't show up as expected. Instead, it displays undefined, right? Now let's go back again and remove the type of part. Looking at the console, document.all really does look like an array. You can even see a bunch of elements inside it. But the truth is, it's not actually an array. Let's prove it. We know that with arrays, we can run loops using methods like forEach, right? So if we try calling document.all.forEach, the console immediately throws an error saying document.all.forEach is not a function. This clearly proves that document.all is not an array. It only looks like one, but in reality, it's an object. More specifically, it's a special type of object known as an HTML all collection. Exactly, this is a collection, and if you look closely at what's inside this collection, you will notice it starts with HTML, then head, then meta, just like the order in your index.html file. Compare it carefully. At the very top of index.html, you have the HTML tag, and in the console, the first item is also HTML. After that comes head, then inside head, you see the 3 meta tags, followed by title, the link, and the body. So the browser organizes everything in sequence, one element after another, exactly as they appear from top to bottom in the HTML file. Now, in this particular page, the collection contains around 161 elements. If your HTML file grows bigger, this object will also grow accordingly. Here's something interesting. Even though document.all is not an array, you can still loop through it. That means you can iterate over each element one by one and traverse the entire collection. So, how do we do that? Well, if we expand the prototype property of any element from the console, we will see that it contains symbol.iterator. And the presence of symbol.iterator means we can iterate over it. That's why whether we use a regular for loop or a for off loop, we are able to loop through this collection. If you want to try it out, just write for let element of document.all and inside that loop, put console.log. So each element gets printed one by one. After saving, check the console. You'll see that all the elements are showing up individually. This proves that we can loop through document.all, and the reason is that it has symbol.iterator built into it. That means to iterate over an HTML all collection type list, we can use either a for loop or a for off loop. And not just that, besides looping, we can also access elements inside an HTML all collection just like we do with arrays. For example, if we skip the loop code and directly write console.log in the bracket document.all square bracket 4, notice in the console it shows the title element because the index for the title is 4. See, the title has appeared in the browser console, but this isn't really the standard way we select DOM elements. You might be thinking, well, if I can access elements with square brackets and array indexes, then why not just use that all the time to manipulate the DOM? The truth is, it doesn't work that way. This method isn't reliable or practical for selecting and working with elements in the DOM. The reason behind is that when we work with JavaScript on a web page, many elements can change dynamically. Different scripts can modify or add elements in various ways, and when that happens, the array-like indexes also shift. For example, right now, the title element is at index 4, but if I go back to index.html and add another meta tag just above the title, say a meta description with the content "We love JavaScript," then the title's index will no longer be 4. It will shift down. And right away, you will notice in the console that the title's index has shifted to 5. That's why you should never rely on indexes to manipulate the DOM. It's a very bad practice because your HTML document is dynamic. Over time, you will use third-party plugins, scripts, or even make changes yourself. And those can all rearrange elements, causing their indexes to change. That's why we never access DOM elements this way. It's simply not how things are done. So, how do you actually do it? That's something I will show you in the next lesson when we dive into DOM traversal. There, I will explain the proper way to select and navigate elements. But before we wrap up, let me show you one more thing. Suppose you want to grab all the images for your page, the entire set of images that exist on the document. How can we do that? So, if you write document.images, you will get back another HTML collection. Just like before, this isn't an array. Inside it, you will find all the images from your page. Since I only have one image in this page, it's showing just that single image inside the list. In the same way, if you want to fetch all the links, you can use document.links. But because my index.html doesn't have any links, it's returning nothing. Similarly, if you try document.forms, it will return all the forms present on the page. In my case, there's only one form, so it gave me just that one. So this is how you can print the document object and explore its different properties. You can experiment and play around with them as much as you want. That's it for the practical side of the document object model or DOM. In the next lesson, we will move forward.